How to Stay Invisible. Chapter 13. When Stiggs inspected Rosie's leg the next day, he said she wasn't well enough to travel. Raymond still wasn't sure about the man, but he also knew he didn't want to leave yet. He'd finally fallen asleep late last night, and he'd woken up feeling like a whole new person. He felt rested. He wasn't starving. His back didn't ache. So he lied and told Stiggs that his parents wouldn't be home until after the new year. They're going to a party and kids aren't allowed. It wasn't the truth, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. If Raymond knew his parents, they probably would be at some party, and none of the parties his parents attended ever allowed kids. Stiggs poured a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. "Won't they be worried if they call home and don't get an answer?" he asked. "We don't have a phone," Raymond said truthfully, "so even if they wanted to call, they couldn't." Stiggs looked at Raymond for a long time without responding. His eyebrows were pinched together in concentration. He took a sip of his coffee. Raymond wasn't sure if he should say something, and he felt the urge again to just grab Rosie and run. "All right then," Stiggs finally said, snapping Raymond out of it. "You'll stay for now until your parents are back." Raymond let a breath out that he hadn't realized he was holding. "Besides," he continued, "I could use the help around here. These old bones aren't what they used to be." When Raymond didn't say anything, Stiggs got up and walked to the door. As far as Raymond could tell, Stiggs could get around just fine. He pulled on his coat and followed Stiggs out the door. Behind the cabin was a small building that Raymond hadn't noticed the day before. Stiggs opened a little gate. "Come on, girls," he called, and Raymond watched as at least 10 little chickens came skirting out of their coop and through the gate. Raymond stood aside, letting them run past. "Will they come back?" he asked. One of the hens was already past the car in the front drive. "They will if they want to eat and stay warm," Stiggs said. He tossed Raymond a basket, which he caught against his chest. "Grab the eggs, will ya? And be careful. Missy likes to lay hers on the ground." Raymond grinned, wondering which of the chickens was Missy. Stiggs cleaned the water bowls and raked out the mulch beneath the coop. Raymond finished collecting the eggs, which he found oddly satisfying. "Grab that bucket up top there and feed them," Stiggs said, pointing to the rafters. Raymond did as he was told. He removed the lid with a pop. As soon as the chickens heard the sound, they were coming from all directions back to the coop. Raymond stood quickly, momentarily stunned at the onrush of birds. Stiggs chuckled. "You better give them their treat before they get angry." The chickens were already jumping and cackling at Raymond's feet. He grabbed a handful of the dried grubs and sprinkled them around. The birds happily accepted his offering, flapping their wings. Raymond tossed a few more handfuls. He laughed as the birds fought one another for one grub when there were tons more right beside them. Stiggs turned the lights off under the water bowls and hung the rake back up on the wall. "We'll make sure they're closed back in the pen before dark," he said, leaving the gate open as he walked around the side of the house. Stiggs dropped the eggs off inside and met Raymond out front. They spent the rest of the morning dragging tree limbs and chopping them into firewood. They were splitting a large fallen tree up the hill from the cabin when Raymond spotted a familiar tree from the river. "Hey, a paper tree," he said. Stiggs looked over his shoulder. "That is a river birch," he said. "They're pretty common in River Mill. Makes a good landscape tree." "The bark makes a pretty good fire, too," said Raymond, and immediately wished he hadn't. Stiggs didn't seem to be bothered by the statement, though. He grunted and kept on working. Stiggs knew the name of every tree and plant in the surrounding woods. Raymond found himself pointing to trees, asking Stiggs to name them. Most of the time he named them outright. Other times he told Raymond to get back to work. Stiggs didn't talk much, but Raymond didn't mind. He had never been much of a talker anyway, and it was nice to have somebody to just be quiet with for a while. He wondered what would happen if Harlan ever met Stiggs. The thought made Raymond laugh out loud as he felled a small pine. After they cleared and dragged the backwoods, they spent the rest of the afternoon fixing a busted water pipe around the side of the cabin. There was still a pile of wood to chop, but Stiggs said it could wait until tomorrow. That night, after the chickens were called back to their coop for the evening, Raymond helped Stiggs batter fish fillets to fry. He thought about what a luxury a frying pan was. Stiggs rolled sweet potatoes in tinfoil and popped them in the oven. He pulled field peas from the freezer and cooked them slowly on the stove. When the sweet potatoes were finished, he and Raymond sliced them open, adding pats of butter and spoonfuls of brown sugar. Raymond watched the butter and sugar melt into the potato, and his mouth watered. "You sure can eat," Stiggs said, eyeing Raymond as he helped himself to seconds and thirds. "Sorry," Raymond said, swallowing a mouthful. "It's been a while since I've had anyone to cook for, and anyway, the freezer's been needing a cleaning out." Raymond nodded and offered Rosie the leftover portion of his third fillet of fish. She ate it in one bite, and Stiggs grunted, smiling. Raymond thought, this must be what families did. They sat around the table making small talk about the meal or their day, or laughing at the family pet while they ate spaghetti. He thought about his failed Thanksgiving dinner. Stiggs made this feel so easy. Raymond's family had only ever successfully eaten a meal together once. He took another bite of his peas. "You said you moved here this year?" Stiggs asked. Raymond could hear the questioning tone and quietly begged himself to remain calm. He nodded. "And your parents? They leave you like this often?" Raymond wanted to trust Stiggs, but he knew that he had to be careful how he answered. "Sometimes," Raymond replied and took another bite of his sweet potato. He tried to appear unbothered by the questions. Stiggs was quiet for what felt like a long time. "You have any other family?" Raymond shook his head. He thought Stiggs would keep asking him questions, but the man just gave a final grunt and got up from the table. He dropped his plate in the sink and began washing the dishes. Raymond joined him. When they were finished with the dishes, Stiggs walked into the living room and didn't say another word for the rest of the night. The next day, Raymond woke up early and took a long shower. He stood in the water until his fingers were wrinkled and his skin was red from the heat. He couldn't remember the last time he had had a proper hot shower. He would have stayed there longer, but Stiggs came to the door and barked, "Hey, leave some hot water for the rest of us, will ya?" Raymond quickly turned the water off and scrambled out of the bathroom. That afternoon, he helped Stiggs patch a hole in the roof of the chicken coop, and they chopped the rest of the fallen tree in the afternoon. Stiggs fried eggs and sausage, and they sat on the porch drinking hot cocoa after dinner. Snow still clung to the ground, but it was a nice night for being outside. Raymond had saved a piece of soft wood from the chopping block and was using one of Stiggs' steak knives to whittle it. "Who taught you how to do that?" Stiggs asked. "Nobody," Raymond shrugged. "Just taught myself." "Hand it here," said Stiggs. "I want to try." Stiggs' hands weren't as steady as Raymond's, and he kept taking out big chunks of wood and cussing. "You have to hold your thumb out," said Raymond. He couldn't help but laugh, which would elicit glares from Stiggs and more cussing. "I thought you said you were a surgeon," Raymond joked. "Yeah, that's what I said." Stiggs took a large chunk out of the wood by mistake and groaned. He handed the knife and the wood back to Raymond. "What about it?" Raymond thought for a moment. Don't surgeons make a lot of money? Stiggs chuckled, and Raymond immediately apologized. He wasn't trying to be rude. He loved the little cabin, but couldn't help but notice that it wasn't exactly the fanciest place to live. It had one bathroom and two small bedrooms, just big enough for beds. It wasn't wired for heat like most houses were. It relied solely on the wood-burning fireplace, and the bedrooms got cold at night. Stiggs seemed to be constantly making repairs and fixing things that were broken, and although they were clean, the furnishings were old and tattered. Some do, I suppose, but I was an army surgeon, and army surgeons make the same as any other officer. Oh, said Raymond, smoothing out the edges of the wood with a knife. I didn't have much taste for surgery after I got back, said Stiggs. He took a sip of his coffee, or anything else for that matter. Raymond nodded. Except fishing, he said. You still like to fish? Yeah, I still like to fish. Fish don't talk, and the river never asks me for anything in return. He stood up. It's getting cold out here. Come on in when you're done. And he was through the door before Raymond could ask him any more questions. Raymond sat outside whittling the wood for another hour. He thought about what Stiggs had said. Raymond had been fishing for so long, and he had never stopped to wonder why he loved it so much. Now that he thought about it, every time he needed to get away from his parents or just be alone, he had gone fishing. It was quiet and peaceful. He could rely on fishing for that, and Raymond could never really rely on much else, except for Rosie and maybe Harlan. When he was finished, he walked inside and set the small wooden fish he had carved on the kitchen table before finally scooping Rosie from the couch and going to bed. Raymond did what he could to help out around the cabin, cleaning up after meals and chopping wood into the evening. Stiggs kept a fire going in the house all the time, so at least the living room was always warm. By the fourth day, the wood pile on the front porch was stacked neatly to the ceiling. Rosie started to hobble around on her three good legs, and Raymond helped Stiggs inspect and clean the wound, careful to follow directions. Raymond had never met anyone like Stiggs. Despite his crankiness and his sometimes gruff responses, he liked the old man. They seemed to understand each other without speaking. On the fourth night of Raymond's stay, it snowed again, and Raymond helped Stiggs shovel the steps and dig out the car the next day. Then they wrapped the car tires in chains. There was a small slab of concrete at the bottom of the front steps, and Raymond scraped the shovel across it. In the corner, there were 3 sets of handprints pressed into the concrete, 2 adults and 1 child's. Raymond resisted the urge to bend over and place his own hands on the child's handprints. Did you live here when you were a kid? He asked Stiggs, who was replacing the light bulb in the fixture on the front porch. Not exactly, Stiggs said. It was my family's hunting cabin. I used to come here with my father sometimes. It's about the only good memory I have of this place. Of this man. He screwed in the light bulb and crawled down from the ladder to get the fixture. Raymond nodded. He didn't want to pry, but he had so many questions. He wanted to know more about Stiggs, about his family. He couldn't help himself. Was your family from here then? Raymond asked. Stiggs held the fixture in place and began screwing it back to the porch ceiling. My father was, yes. My mother was from somewhere on the West Coast, I think. She died when I was just a baby. My father never said much about her. Raymond stopped shoveling and looked at Stiggs. Stiggs climbed down from the ladder, reached inside the door, and flipped the switch. The light blinked on. There, he said. Rosie whined at his feet, so he bent over and gave her a pat. Raymond started shoveling again, and Stiggs sat on the top porch step, petting Rosie. Stiggs continued this time without being asked. I grew up about 15 miles from here at an orphanage off the highway a little past Hillsboro. He said it matter-of-factly. that Raymond was taken back, even though he tried hard not to show it. He dragged the shovel across the slab until he met gravel. I guess they don't really call them orphanages anymore, Stiggs continued. It's a school now, I'm told. Rivermill was the only town with a middle school back then, so we all got bussed over. And my father used to come pick me up a few times a year and bring me over here to hunt. My old man wasn't much of a father, and he knew it. Stiggs took a breath. From what I can tell, neither is yours. But we make do with what we've been given, don't we? Doesn't make it right, but it is what it is. Raymond didn't respond, so Stiggs continued. I was 16 when my father died, and I left the orphanage and moved in here. Alone? Raymond asked. It took Stiggs a moment to answer, and Raymond thought he could see the shadow of a smile on his face. Not always, Stiggs said, but there are worse things than being alone, Raymond. Raymond looked back down at the shovel. Stiggs stood and went inside. Rosie followed. At the children's home, parents were allowed to visit on Saturdays only. One little girl who was about Raymond's age used to sit on the bench outside of the visitation lounge and wait for her mother every Saturday. When her mother showed up, she would complain the entire time about what a burden it was to be visiting. Raymond remembered overhearing her the first few weekends that he was there. The girl's mother never made an effort to keep her voice down, and the whole visitation room could hear. It was always about how lucky the girl was that she had a mother who showed up. And couldn't they do something about the air conditioning? Or couldn't visitation be on a more convenient day? At least Raymond's parents had seemed to be trying at the time. After a while, Raymond had a hard time looking at the girl when his own parents showed up. So he would just look at her shoes when they passed by. She always wore Converse tennis shoes with red laces. There are worse things than being alone, Raymond agreed with Stiggs. He finished shoveling the drive and then chopped the rest of the wood before going back inside. By the end of the week, Rosie was getting around much better and was able to go up and down the porch steps on her own. She was eating more, and Raymond knew that their time at the cabin was coming to a close. On the morning of New Year's Eve, Raymond woke up early to make breakfast. He gathered eggs from the hens and scrambled them. He did his best with the bacon, only burning it a little. He and Stiggs sat at the table and ate without speaking. When breakfast was done, Stiggs took his plate to the sink and walked to the front door. Come on then, he said. There's work to be done. Raymond grabbed his coat. After they tended the chickens, Stiggs pulled an old broken space heater out of the shed. Probably just needs a good cleaning, he said, but Raymond wasn't so sure. It looked ancient. The bolts and screws were rusted together. Stiggs noticed the expression on Raymond's face. She's got at least as much life left in her as I do. Raymond made another face and Stiggs growled, Watch it. Raymond smiled and grabbed a wrench from the toolbox. By the end of the day, the space heater was cleaned up with new bolts and running like a dream. Raymond helped Stiggs carry it into the cabin, and they plugged it in Raymond's room. That night, as Raymond lay in bed, he thought about how his winter break had turned out very different from how he thought it would. He had told Stiggs that his parents would be home after the new year, so he knew he would have to leave the next day. He thought about Stiggs cooking him dinners and showing him how to do things, helping him learn the right way to chop wood and fixing the space heater so Raymond wouldn't get cold. His parents had never done anything with Raymond. They couldn't even be bothered to stick around for Christmas or at least say goodbye. He sat up, jolting Rosie awake beside him. He threw the blanket off and got out of bed. He felt like his chest, his throat, his heart was going to explode. He wanted to scream and hit something. He wanted to run. He pulled his shoes on and walked quickly down the hall and out the door. He practically leaped off the front porch and ran into the darkness until the gravel turned to dirt beneath his feet. When he finally came to a stop, his face wet with tears. He screamed as if his parents were standing right there in front of him. The sound poured out of him and wrapped around him in frozen clouds. Wherever his parents were right now, they wouldn't hear him. Even if they were standing right in front of Raymond, they wouldn't hear him. He stood there in the darkness, swallowing air and panting until his breath became steady. He wiped his face, turned around, and walked slowly back to the cabin. Stiggs was standing on the porch in his coat and shoes, holding a flashlight when Raymond appeared. Raymond knew he should apologize, but was suddenly unable to use his voice. Stiggs held the door open for him without saying a word. The next morning, Raymond found Stiggs in the kitchen drinking a cup of coffee. "Your folks will be coming home today then?" It was more of a statement than a question. Raymond couldn't bring himself to say anything, so he just nodded. "Listen, kid, is there anything I can do to help? Someone I could call for you?" "No," Raymond said, a little too quickly. He had heard this question before. He corrected himself and tried to shrug it off. "No, really, I'm fine." Stiggs studied Raymond. "What about Rosie? You think you'll be able to get her to a vet?" Raymond didn't answer. "No, I didn't think so. Well, her leg is healed now. I'd feel better if she was properly looked at by someone, but I think she'll be okay. She's a tough old girl." Rosie had come into the room and affectionately rubbed her back against Stiggs. He patted her head. Over the past week, Rosie had become very attached to the old man, following him from room to room. Stiggs took a deep breath. "When you're ready, I'll get you home." "That's okay," said Raymond, standing quickly. "We can walk from here. It's not too far, and I can carry Rosie if she has trouble." Stiggs didn't respond right away. He was staring out the kitchen window, his back to Raymond. "My son was like you," he said finally. "He talked more than you and was always more eager than he needed to be. But he was smart, and he managed a lot on his own, more than he should have." What happened to him? Every time Stiggs had mentioned his son, which wasn't often, he used the past tense. "Afghanistan," Stiggs said, still looking out the window. He hung his head for a minute and then turned around to face Raymond. "One way or another, war takes your life, whether you come back or not, whether you keep on living or not. It changes you, and you can't ever get back to who you were before, no matter how hard you try." Raymond looked at his friend. He thought about the picture of the younger Stiggs smiling with his son in the boat. He wondered if Stiggs was talking about his son or himself. He guessed maybe both. After breakfast, Raymond made his bed and picked up around the spare room. Stiggs handed him a grocery bag of a few wrapped up leftovers, some protein bars, and medicine for Rosie. He also dropped in the few cans of dog food that he had left. He gave him instructions on how to administer the medicine, and Raymond nodded, listening carefully. He handed Stiggs the old fur army hat that he had let him borrow, but Stiggs shook his head. "Keep it," he said. He gestured to Rosie. "If she needs anything, just bring her by the house." Raymond nodded again. He wanted to hug the old man, but couldn't imagine actually doing it. "Thank you," he said instead, holding out his hand. Stiggs grunted, shaking it. Then Raymond tried to let go, but Stiggs held it firm. "Whatever it is, kid, you can tell me when you're ready. Maybe I can help." Raymond did want to tell him. He wanted to tell him everything. Stiggs would understand, wouldn't he? Stiggs would help him. Raymond opened his mouth, and then he thought of every other time in his life when he had asked for help. Every other time when he had tried to rely on someone else. He thought of his parents and of the children's home. He thought of the social worker's car driving away down the street. He thought of the big blue duffel bag sitting open on the front step of the trailer. No, Stiggs was his friend, a great friend. But he couldn't help Raymond. Raymond closed his mouth and gave a final nod, letting go of the old man's hand. He made his way down the front steps with Rosie hopping down behind him. "I don't go fishing much in the winter," Stiggs called from the porch. "But when I do, I usually go on Saturdays." Raymond turned toward his friend. "Maybe I'll see you there then." But Stiggs had already gone back inside the cabin and was closing the door behind him.